Welcome back to Filling in the History. I am the amateur historian. We're going to be going through some what I thought was easy stuff that turned into some very interesting stories. We're going to be going through sections 23 through 26, which is actually quite a lot of revelations packed into a few. We're going to be talking about the first hymnal. We're going to be talking about the revelation of Emma Smith. We're going to be talking about a book outside of the Joseph Smith papers, because I'm going to go maverick on this, or rogue, or whatever people say about things. Anyway, so we're going to start today with section 23. Part 2 will be sections 24. Part 3 will be section 25, which is going to be a lot about Emma Smith. There's also a lot of things in between these sections that we're going to be discussing that are very interesting to me, especially where they come from, where we found these documents. And then the very last section is going to be rather brief, actually, because there's not a whole lot about section 26. So let's dive in. Going to have kind of a long story at the end of this part, because I didn't know what to cut out or what to do. And so anyway, it's an interesting story. You'll see in a moment. So, and by way of introduction to the papers of section 23, the earliest versions of this are actually found in Revelation Book 1. And section 23 is actually a combination of 5 different revelation, or what they are called commandments, in Revelation Book 1. So in order that they were given in Revelation Book 1, so John Whitmer wrote this down, is Oliver Cowdery is first, then Hiram Smith, Samuel Smith, Joseph Smith Sr., which is Joseph Smith's father, and Joseph Knight Sr. So this pattern of keeping these is very, very small, and I'm talking in current canon, even back then, it's like 1 or 2 verses in each revelation, was followed in the Book of Commandments. So in 1833, the pattern follows, so they're in 5 individual chapters, so 17 through 21, in the order of the people mentioned above. The introduction to this is also basically the same for everybody in the Book of Commandments. It says, quote, a revelation given to somebody, given in Manchester, New York, April 6th, 1830, unquote. So that is, you just take Oliver Cowdery, Hiram Samuel, Joseph, and this is the same thing each time. In section 45 of the Doctrine and Covenants 2 years later, all 5 of these were combined into one. So, and that introduction is a little different. It reads Revelation to Oliver Cowdery, Hiram Smith, Samuel H. Smith, Joseph Smith Sr., and Joseph Knight Sr., given April of 1830. So the biggest thing of note here is that, again, they are combined together, but the biggest thing here is the date. So according to the Book of Commandments, and that's the only place you see this, it says April 6th, 1830, which has never been shared since then. So even in the earliest Doctrine and Covenants version, it's like sometime in April. So we don't really know exactly when it is. And I will also mention here that between the 1981 and the 2013 editions, which most Latter-day Saints would use today, they have the exact same section heading, with the notable exception of the history of the church reference being removed. And again, it kind of gives April 1830, so we don't really know. So some circumstantial introductions to section 23. We don't get a whole lot from the manuscript history. From draft 2 also combines all these into one revelation, which makes sense because I believe it came after the Doctrine and Covenants was put together in 1835. But we do get a brief introduction from draft 2, which is also just History of the Church, Volume 1, which says, the following persons being anxious to know of the Lord what might be their respective duties in relation to this work, I inquired of the Lord and received for them the following. That's what you get. And that general sentiment is carried into the 1981 and 2013 editions of the section headings, anyway, of the Doctrine and Covenants. So we get a little bit more, of course, from Documents Volume 1, which we are using to sort of make a chronological history of these documents here. The historical introduction says, each of the following 5 revelations, which were dictated soon after the organization of the Church of Christ, 6th of April, 1830, addressed one of Joseph Smith's family members or a close associate who desired to know the Lord's will concerning himself. All 5 texts include similar content and phrasing, and Joseph Smith likely dictated them one after the other. John Whitmer recorded them separately in Revelation Book 1 and assigned the date AD 1830 to each one. Though the editors of the Book of Commandments printed the Revelations separately and gave each date of April 6, 1830. That date appears to be in error and was dropped 2 years later in 1835 when the Doctrine and Covenants combined the text into a single document with a general April 1830 date. Joseph Smith's history and other sources suggest that the Revelations date between the 6th of April organization and an 11th of April meeting, both of which took place in Fayette Township, New York. So a lot of problems with the Book of Commandments introductions, but we'll forgive it because, we have other more correct versions now. So because there are 5 revelations here, what I tried to do is I went through, because I love you so much, I went through each one of these things for you and sort of try to pull out, because obviously a lot of these are repeats. They're most likely given one after the other. And so I have some contextual things for each one of these, wherever it came. So in Oliver Cowdery's, the very first revelation, and I'll just go in order, it's saying, hey, it's time for you to do your calling and go do it. And a lot of people feel that this came true when he preached the very first public sermon of the church. So Oliver Cowdery, very significant here. He's the one who baptized Joseph Smith, ordains Joseph Smith. He baptizes the first convert in Samuel Smith, or the first person to get baptized outside of those two. He also writes a lot of the Articles of Covenants, and now he is the first public sermon preacher of the church. So that, in a way, came true. Next revelation we get is for Hiram Smith, which, as you recall, Doctrine and Covenants, section 11, was given to him. And this new revelation that he gets is received months later. He's being told to treasure up the words and the Spirit so that he can have the power of God unto the convincing of men. And so that's a part of that. Next revelation after that, Samuel Smith, not only being the third baptism of the church, but he was even told to wait for his ministry to begin, which I find funny because then we get this. This is from Lucy Mack Smith's history, and this was a footnote. It says, by the end of June 1830, however, Samuel Smith took copies of the Book of Mormon and set out on a preaching mission after he had been set apart by Joseph. So he was told to wait, and yet he's the first proselyting missionary. So I thought that was kind of fun. Joseph Smith Sr., as you recall, Doctrine and Covenants, section 4 that we now have was directed to him. He gets one of the very first revelations. Joseph Smith history states that Joseph Smith Sr. came forward shortly after the 6th April 1830 meeting and was baptized. Lucy Mack Smith recalled, Joseph stood on the shore when his father came out of the water, and as he took him by the hand, he cried out, "Oh, my God, I have lived to see my father baptized into the true church of Jesus Christ." And he covered his face in his father's bosom and wept aloud for joy. So if you don't know, during the 1820 episode, the first vision and all that, which church is true, Joseph's father never joined any church either. So not Presbyterianism or Baptist or Methodist, all those factions that were there. He also didn't join any of them. So as far as I can tell, this is the church he decides to join. So you can see why that's so special and very beautifully written by Joseph Smith's mother. So, so for Joseph Knight Sr., this is more of an aftermath that was interesting to me. So I remember reading this a long time ago. Some of you may know this story. This is considered the first miracle of the church. So the thing that struck me about this section is there is a phrase that's very commonly used in Christianity, which is to take up your cross or to bear your cross, if you will. In this case, the revelation says, Joseph Knight Sr., you are to take up your cross. Now, I would think that would mean you're going to do something really hard, or you're going to have to leave, or being asked to sacrifice something really great. But in his case, what we get is you need to pray. You need to pray vocally. You need to pray privately. You need to pray in front of your friends, before the world, all that stuff. Now, I don't want to judge that too harshly, because I know there are many people who struggle with prayer, who struggle with what this could mean. And that's what I thought it meant. Boy, was I wrong. So I actually found something in the historical introduction and also in draft 1. I figured I'm going to use the most original copy of this story that we can get, which was later published in my famous book here that I'm holding up, the History of the Church, Volume 1, that I love so much, that I've used. This is a story that was in our official history for a while. So Gird your loins, here we go. So, this was an experience from Joseph Knight Sr., and I'll just start with the historical introduction found in Documents Volume 1. Shortly after this revelation, Joseph Smith held a meeting at Knight's home in Colesville and gave a similar commandment to Knight's son Newell. The younger Knight said that he would try and take up his cross and pray vocally during meeting, but then was unable to follow through. When the group again met together, he rather excused himself. The next day, he retired into the woods where, according to his own account afterwards, he made several attempts to pray, but he could scarcely do so, feeling that he had not done his duty, but that he should have prayed in the presence of others. This led to one of the earliest recorded miracles of the church, when, according to his history, Joseph Smith cast out the devil that had possessed Newell Knight. To which I say, what? So we get this, and I, again, have chosen, there are 3 accounts of this, drafts 1 and 2 and 3. I have chosen draft 1 as the earliest version of it. This is also, again, published, as I'm holding in my hand. This was published in our History of the Church as the first miracle of the church, since it was organized. Just so that you know, this is written, this is going to be long, and it is written in first person for Joseph Smith, and Joseph Smith goes to Newell Knight. You're going to see a lot of he and I. I is referring to Joseph Smith, he and so forth is usually referring to Newell Knight at this point. So here we go. Ready? From the manuscript history of the church. Quote, he began to feel uneasy and felt worse both in mind and body, until upon reaching his house, his appearance was such as to alarm his wife very much. He requested her to go and bring me to him. I went and found him suffering very much in his mind, and his body acted upon in a most strange manner, his visage and limbs distorted and twisted in a most strange manner. I'm just going to try that again. So, from the manuscript history of the church. He began to feel uneasy and felt worse both in mind and body, until upon reaching his house, his appearance was such as to alarm his wife very much. He requested her to go and bring me to him. I went and found him suffering very much in his mind, and his body acted upon in a most strange manner, his visage and limbs distorted and twisted in every possible shape and appearances. Finally he was caught up off the floor of the apartment and tossed about most fearfully. His situation was soon made known to his neighbors and relatives. In a short time, as many as 8 or 9 grown persons had got together to witness the scene. After he had thus suffered for some time, I succeeded in getting hold of him by the hand, when almost immediately he was able to speak, and requested with great earnestness that I should cast the devil out of him, that he knew that he was in him, and that he also knew that I could cast him out. I replied, quote, if you know that I can, it shall be done, unquote. And almost unconsciously, I rebuked the devil and commanded him to leave in the name of Jesus Christ, to depart from him. When immediately Newell spoke out and said that he saw the devil leave him and vanish from his sight. Parenthetical phrase here, this was the first miracle wrought in this church. The scene was now entirely changed, for verily as soon as the devil had departed from this our friend, his countenance became natural, his distortions of body ceased, and almost immediately the Spirit of God descended upon him to such a degree that the visions of eternity were opened to his view, and he beheld great and glorious things. He afterward related his experience of this as follows. I now began to feel a most pleasing sensation resting upon me, and immediately the visions of heaven were opened to my view. I felt myself attracted towards, or upwards, and remained for some time enwrapped in the contemplation, insomuch that I knew not what was going on in the room. But by and by I felt some weight pressing upon my shoulder and the side of my head, which served to recall me to a sense of my situation. And I found that the Spirit of the Lord had actually lifted me off the floor, and that I had removed the floor of the chamber above, and that my shoulder and head were pressing against the beams. All this was witnessed by many to their great astonishment and satisfaction when they saw the devil thus cast out of a human being and the power of God and his Holy Spirit thus made manifest. As so soon as circumstances returned, his bodily weakness was such that we were obliged to put him to bed and wait upon him for some time. As many as may be expected, such a scene as this contributed much to make believers of those who witnessed it, and the greater part finally became members of the church. And thus ends our little discussion about section 23. That is not where I thought this was going to go, but that apparently is recorded in the manuscript history of the church as the first miracle wrought in this dispensation, as we say. So Newell Knight gets that honor, I suppose, and also a very disturbing and very remarkable experience. So that is what is written. That is from draft 1. I will let you make of that as you please. So in section 24, part 2 is our next thing we're getting into here. There's going to be some interesting sort of intermediary documents that we'll talk about briefly. So stay tuned for that, and yeah, enjoy.